How much is the life of a brother worth? 20 pieces of silver. That's the answer. That was the price of a human soul in the dust of Dothan. Think about that sound for a second. The clink, the sharp metallic ring of silver hitting silver. It's a cold sound, a hollow sound. To Judah, it was the sound of a problem solved. To Joseph, it was the sound of his world ending. The sun was a white-hot hammer beating down on the desert floor. Dust kicked up from the hooves of the camels, coating everything in a fine, gritty powder. It was in the teeth. It was in the eyes. It was in the lungs. Joseph felt the rope bite into his wrists, the rough hemp fraying against his skin. He wasn't a son anymore. He wasn't a prince of Hebron. He was a line item on a ledger. He was cargo. "Look at me!" Joseph screamed, his voice cracking, raw from the thirst and the terror. But they wouldn't. Not one of them. Not Simeon with his hands still stained with the blood of the kid they'd killed to ruin the coat. Not Levi, who looked at the horizon as if he could see his own future burning there. Only Judah looked, and his eyes were like flint. Judah was counting. 1, 2, 3, 20 pieces, 10 brothers, 2 silver coins for every year of hatred they'd nursed. It was a bargain. Joseph's mind was a storm of why? Why the pit? Why the betrayal? Just yesterday he was the favorite. He was the one in the sleeves. He was the one who dreamed of stars bowing down. Now, he was looking at the back of a Midianite trader, a man who smelled of onions and old leather, who saw Joseph and saw only profit. The caravan began to move. The bells on the camels jingled, a mocking, festive sound in the middle of a funeral for a living boy. Joseph stumbled. The rope jerked his neck, forcing him to walk or be dragged. He looked back one last time. He saw the pit. He saw the brothers. He saw the dust swallowing the only life he had ever known. He thought of Jacob, his father. The old man would be waiting. He'd be looking at the road, shielding his eyes from the glare, waiting for his Ben Zechariah, the son of his old age. He'd never see the boy again. He'd see a blood-soaked rag and a lie. The question remained, hanging in the stagnant air of the desert. Is the price of a brother 20 silver coins, or is it the soul of the men who sold him? As the hills of Canaan began to shrink into the distance, the reality set in. The boy who dreamed was gone. The slave who would survive was being born in the heat. But to understand how a boy becomes a slave, and how a slave becomes a king, we have to look at the world that made him. We have to look at the blood, the soil, and the ancient shadows of the Nile. To understand Joseph, you have to understand the two worlds that collided in his life. These weren't just different countries. They were different dimensions of human existence. First, there was Canaan. It was a land of dust and sheep. Life was measured in rainfall and the health of the flock. It was a tribal world. If you weren't family, you were an enemy. If you weren't a shepherd, you were a nobody. Jacob, Joseph's father, was a man of the soil. He lived in tents. He moved with the seasons. His wealth was alive. It bleated and breathed. But the family dynamic was a powder keg. This wasn't a happy family. This was a house of 4 mothers and 12 sons, all vying for the attention of an old man who had a very clear favorite. Jacob didn't just love Joseph. He obsessed over him. He saw Rachel, his lost love, in the boy's eyes, and by giving him that ketonet pasim, that ornate long-sleeved coat, he might as well have painted a target on the boy's chest. In a world where everyone worked the dirt, that coat said, "This one doesn't have to." Then there was Egypt. Imagine Joseph's face when he first saw the delta. He'd spent 17 years in the brown and beige of the desert. Suddenly, the world turned emerald green. The Nile wasn't just a river, it was a god. It was a pulsing vein of water that turned a wasteland into an empire. Egypt in the Middle Kingdom was the pinnacle of human achievement. While Joseph's brothers were arguing over sheep, the Egyptians were measuring the stars. They had a bureaucracy for everything. They had tax collectors, engineers, priests, and a king who was literally a god on earth. The social structure was a pyramid, quite literally. At the bottom were the slaves and the farmers, the mud people, who built the glory. At the top was Pharaoh, and in between, a complex web of officials like Potiphar. Potiphar wasn't just a soldier. He was the captain of the guard. He was the man responsible for the king's safety and the execution of the king's enemies. His house was a palace. It had gardens, pools of cool water, and walls covered in vibrant paintings. It was a world of order, law, and absolute power. But there was a catch. Egypt hated Asiatics. That's what they called people like Joseph. To an Egyptian, a shepherd was an abomination. They smelled of animals. They were unwashed. They were other. Joseph entered this world as the lowest of the low, a foreign slave who didn't speak the tongue and whose God was invisible in a land of 3,000 idols. Politically, the 12th dynasty was a time of consolidation. The pharaohs were obsessed with grain. They knew that if the people had bread, they wouldn't revolt. They built massive granaries. They mapped the Nile's floods with religious precision. They were prepared for everything, except what God was about to do. Economically, the slave trade was a well-oiled machine. A young, healthy male like Joseph was a premium commodity. 20 shekels was the standard price, about 2 years' wages for a common laborer. It was an investment. Potiphar bought him not because he felt pity, but because he saw potential. This was the arena, a world of high-stakes politics, deep-seated prejudice, and monumental ambition. Joseph was a grain of sand in the gears of an empire. But as any engineer knows, a single grain of sand in the right place can stop the whole machine. Or if it's lucky, it can become a pearl. Joseph wasn't a saint. Not at first. Let's be honest. He was a bit of a brat. Imagine being 17. You're handsome. Not just okay looking, but the Bible says he was well-built and handsome. He knew it. He wore the special coat. He stayed home while his brothers sweated under the sun. And then, he had the dreams. Hey guys, I had a dream. We were binding sheaves in the field and your sheaves bowed down to mine. Oh, and another one. The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed to me. Cool, right? That's not exactly how you win friends. Joseph had a favored son complex. He was naive. He thought his father's protection was a universal law. He thought the dreams were a trophy, not a responsibility. He had the ego of a prince without the character of a king. But underneath the ego, there was something else. There was a connection to the divine that he didn't quite understand yet. His psychology was complex. He loved his father, but he almost certainly felt the weight of his brother's glares. He was isolated even before he was sold. You don't become a dreamer when you have plenty of friends to talk to. You dream when you're alone. You dream when you're looking at the stars while your brothers are mocking you. Then came the trauma, the pit, the darkness, the cold, the realization that the men who shared his blood wanted him dead. That kind of betrayal doesn't just hurt, it rewires your brain. Joseph's prince persona died in that pit. The boy who went into the hole crying for his father came out of the hole looking for a way to survive. In Egypt, he had to reinvent himself. He was Zaphnath-Paneah before he ever got the name. He had to learn to lead without a coat. He had to learn that his value wasn't in Jacob's love, but in his own integrity. He was a man of extremes. He could be incredibly efficient. He ran Potiphar's house like a CEO. He could be incredibly disciplined. He said no to a woman who could have had him killed or made him the most powerful man in the house. But he was also deeply emotional. He was a man who wept. He wept when he saw his brothers. He wept when he saw his father. He was a tough man with a tender heart. His faith was his anchor, but it wasn't an easy faith. He didn't have a Bible. He didn't have a priest. He had only the stories his father told him about the God of Abraham and Isaac. He had to decide if that God was still the God of a slave in a dungeon. His greatest fear? That he was wrong. That the dreams were just a teenager's delusions. That he would die in a hole in Egypt and his name would be forgotten. His greatest dream? Not to be a king, but to be right. To see the sheaves bow down because it would mean that God hadn't lied to him. Joseph was a man caught between his destiny and his reality. He had the heart of a servant and the mind of a ruler. He was a contradiction. He was a Hebrew who looked like an Egyptian, a slave who acted like a master, a man who was betrayed by the world but refused to betray himself. Joseph wasn't the only one in the story. He was surrounded by a cast of characters who were just as broken, just as complex, and just as human. First, there's Jacob. He's an old man now, but he's still the supplanter. He's a man who wrestled with God and came away with a limp. He's haunted by the ghost of his own past, betraying his father, fleeing from his brother. When he looks at Joseph, he's trying to fix his life. He's trying to love Joseph enough to make up for the fact that he didn't love Leah. It was a beautiful, toxic love that nearly destroyed the very son he wanted to protect. Then there are the brothers. They aren't just villains. They're neglected sons. Think about Reuben. He was the firstborn. He had all the pressure and none of the favor. He tried to save Joseph. He suggested the pit instead of the knife, planning to come back later, but he was weak. He was a wait-and-see kind of man. His failure to act cost Joseph 13 years of his life. And then there's Judah. Judah is the real mirror to Joseph. He was the one who suggested selling him. What profit is there in killing him? Let's sell him. It was cold. It was pragmatic. It was Judah's way of washing his hands of the blood while still getting what he wanted. But Judah's arc is the most dramatic. He goes from the man who sells his brother for silver to the man who offers his own life to save his youngest brother, Benjamin. He is the lion who learns to sacrifice. Then we enter Egypt and we meet Potiphar. Potiphar is a professional. He's seen it all. He knows Joseph is a slave, but he's not a fool. He sees the blessing. He sees that everything this kid touches turns to gold. He trusts Joseph more than his own countrymen. But Potiphar is also a man of his time. When his wife makes the accusation, he has a choice. If he truly believed she was raped, he would have killed Joseph instantly. He didn't. He put him in the royal prison. It was a political move, saving face while sparing the life of the best administrator he ever had. And then, the wife. History has painted her as a monster, but she was likely a bored, powerful woman in a golden cage. She saw something in Joseph that she didn't have, freedom of soul. She wanted to possess it, and when she couldn't, she wanted to destroy it. She is the ultimate test of Joseph's character. Finally, there's Pharaoh. He isn't a tyrant in this story. He's a man burdened by the weight of a nation. He's haunted by dreams he can't explain. He's the peak of human power, yet he's helpless before a few images of cows and grain. He is the one who recognizes that the Spirit of God is in this foreigner. Every character in Joseph's life was a tool in the hand of a master weaver. Some were the dark threads, some were the light. But without the brothers' jealousy, there is no Egypt. Without Potiphar's wife, there is no prison. Without the prison, there is no Pharaoh. It was a perfectly choreographed dance of human failure and divine providence. The journey from Hebron to Egypt wasn't just a 250-mile walk. It was the stripping of an identity. Every mile Joseph walked behind those camels, a piece of the old Joseph fell away. The sun burned off his prince skin. The sand scoured his favored memories. By the time he saw the Great Pyramids on the horizon, he wasn't a Hebrew anymore. He was a number. He arrived in Egypt at the height of the Middle Kingdom. The air was different here. It smelled of the river, damp, fishy, and fertile. It smelled of incense from the temples of Ra and Amun. It was loud. Canaan was silent. Egypt was a roar of commerce, construction, and ritual. He was stood on the auction block. Imagine the humiliation. Men looking at his teeth, men feeling his muscles, men talking about him as if he were a beast of burden. This was the boy who dreamed of stars. Now he was being bid on by Potiphar, but then something shifted. The Lord was with Joseph. That's the refrain of his life. It didn't mean he didn't suffer. It meant that in his suffering, there was a +1. In Potiphar's house, Joseph decided not to die. He decided to be the best slave Egypt had ever seen. He learned the language. He learned the complex Egyptian math. He learned how to manage an estate that was larger than some Canaanite cities. He rose quickly. Potiphar gave him everything. The keys to the granaries, the oversight of the servants. Joseph was the vizier of a private house. He was powerful, successful, and safe. For a few years, it looked like the story had a happy ending. He'd made it. He was a success story. But God isn't interested in us being successful slaves. He wants us to be sovereign rulers. The test came in the form of a woman's gaze. It was a daily battle. "Lie with me," she said. Day after day, it would have been so easy to say yes. He was a young man. He was lonely. He was a slave. What did he owe to Potiphar's honor? But Joseph's answer changed the course of history. "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" He didn't say, "It's against the rules." He didn't say, "Potiphar will find out." He said it was a sin against God. His morality wasn't based on his circumstances. It was based on his relationship. He chose the dungeon over the bed. When he fled, leaving his garment in her hand, he was losing his coat for the second time. The first time his brothers took it. This time he threw it away. The first coat was a symbol of his father's favoritism. This second coat was a symbol of his Egyptian success. God was stripping him again. He was thrown into the pit, again. But this time, it was a literal dungeon, a hole for the king's prisoners. It was dark, damp, and hopeless. Most men died there. Most men lost their minds there. But Joseph, he just started organizing the prison. He became the favorite of the jailer. Why? Because even in a hole, the Lord was with Joseph. He found a way to be useful in the dark. He found a way to care for others while his own life was falling apart. 13 years. That's how long he was in the system. 13 years of being almost there. 13 years of waiting for dreams that seemed like lies. He was being forged. Canaan was the clay. Potiphar's house was the shaping. The prison was the kiln. And the fire was about to get much, much hotter. Prison has a way of erasing a man. The walls of an Egyptian dungeon were thick, made of sun-dried brick and stone that held the dampness of the Nile. There were no windows, just the flickering light of oil lamps that smelled of rancid fat. The air was thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, rot, and the metallic tang of despair. Joseph sat in that darkness for years. Not days, not weeks. Years. Can you imagine the internal monologue? Day 400. God is testing me. He'll come today. Day 800. Maybe I misunderstood the dreams. Day 200. Perhaps there is no God in Egypt. But Joseph didn't break. He thrived. That is the most Hollywood and yet the most holy part of the story. He didn't just survive. He became the administrator of his own misery. The jailer didn't have to worry about a thing because Joseph was there. He was a man who looked at a mess and saw a system. He looked at a prisoner and saw a person. Then the VIPs arrived. The chief butler and the chief baker, the men who touched the king's food. They had offended Pharaoh, maybe a fly in the wine, maybe a hair in the bread. In Egypt, that was a death sentence. One morning, Joseph walked into their cell and did something extraordinary. He noticed them. Why are your faces so sad today? Think about that. He's a slave in a hole, and he's asking the king's officials why they are sad. That is the mark of a leader. He had enough emotional margin to care about someone else's pain while he was drowning in his own. They had dreams. Joseph's eyes must have lit up. He knew dreams. The butler. 3 branches of a vine. He squeezes the grapes into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph. In 3 days you'll be back in the palace. Remember me. Please. Tell Pharaoh about this hole. The baker. 3 baskets of bread on his head. Birds are eating the bread. Joseph. In 3 days. Well, the birds will be eating you. It happened exactly as he said. The baker was hanged. The butler was restored. And then, the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. That is one of the most painful sentences in the Bible. 2 more years of silence. 2 more years of nothing. Joseph probably watched every sunrise from that small slit in the wall, waiting for a guard to say, "The butler mentioned you." But the butler was busy. He was drinking fine wine. He was back in the sun. He didn't want to remember the man from the hole, until Pharaoh screamed in his sleep. 7 fat cows. 7 skinny cows. The skinny ones eat the fat ones and stay skinny. 7 full ears of corn. 7 withered ears. The withered eat the full. Pharaoh woke up in a cold sweat. He called his magicians, the wise men of Egypt, the men with the scrolls and the stars. They couldn't say a word. The dreams were a locked door, and they didn't have the key. That's when the butler's memory clicked. I remember my faults today. He told Pharaoh about the Hebrew in the hole. The transition was instant. 1 minute, Joseph is in rags, smelling of the dungeon. The next, guards are at the door. They shave him. Egyptians hated facial hair. It was barbaric. They gave him new clothes. They dragged him into the presence of the Sun King. Joseph stood before the most powerful man on earth. He didn't bow. He didn't stutter. Pharaoh, I hear you can interpret dreams. Joseph, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. In that one sentence, Joseph won. He didn't take the credit. He didn't play the magic game. He pointed to the source. He explained the dreams. 7 years of plenty. 7 years of famine. The famine will be so bad the plenty will be forgotten. But then, Joseph did something he wasn't asked to do. He gave a business plan. You need a man. A wise man. Collect 20% of the grain during the good years. Store it. Save the world. Pharaoh looked at his court. He looked at his magicians. Then he looked at the 30-year-old foreigner with the clear eyes and the unshakable voice. Can we find such a man as this? one in whom the Spirit of God is. Pharaoh took off his signet ring, the ring that could sign laws and move armies. He put it on Joseph's finger. He gave him a gold chain. He gave him a chariot. In 1 hour, Joseph went from prisoner 402 to Prime Minister of Egypt. The sheaves were starting to stand up. Success is often a harder test than suffering. For 13 years, Joseph was tested by no. Now he was being tested by yes. He was 30 years old. He had absolute power. He had a new name, Zaphnath-Paneah, the Savior of the world, or God speaks in lives. He had a beautiful Egyptian wife, Asenath, the daughter of a high priest. He was made. He could have used his power to send an army to Hebron and burn his brother's tents. He could have found Potiphar's wife and had her executed. He could have turned his back on the God of his fathers and become a good Egyptian. But Joseph didn't look back. He looked forward. For 7 years, he was a whirlwind of activity. He traveled the length of the Nile. He built granaries that looked like mountains. He organized a national tax system that was so efficient it became the foundation of Egyptian wealth for centuries. He saw the grain piling up as the sand of the sea. Eventually, they stopped counting. There was no number for the blessing Joseph was managing. He had 2 sons. Manasseh, God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. Ephraim, God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. He was trying to heal. He was trying to build a new life over the scars of the old one. He thought the past was dead. He thought the sheaves had already bowed. And then the sky turned to brass. The Nile didn't rise. The earth cracked. The green turned to brown, then to gray. The famine began. It wasn't just Egypt. It was all lands. The entire Middle East was starving. People were eating their seeds. They were eating their livestock. They were dying. Except in Egypt. Joseph opened the storehouses. He didn't give the grain away. He sold it. He brought the wealth of the world into Pharaoh's coffers. He was the most important man on the planet because he held the bread. Far away in Hebron, an old man named Jacob looked at his 10 sons. They were sitting around, staring at each other, waiting for death. "Why do you look at one another?" Jacob snapped. "I've heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there. Buy some, or we die." The brothers left. They didn't know they were walking into a trap set by God. They didn't know that the Egyptian ruler they were about to meet was the boy they'd sold for 20 silver coins. Joseph was sitting on his throne when they arrived. He recognized them instantly. How could he not? Their faces were the geography of his nightmares. They bowed, deep, foreheads to the dust. Joseph watched them. He saw the gray in their beards. He saw the fear in their eyes. The sheaves had bowed. But Joseph wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Not because he was vengeful, but because he had to know. Had they changed? Or were they still the men who could sell a brother for silver? The game was about to begin. Joseph played the part of the harsh Egyptian perfectly. "You are spies," he thundered through an interpreter. He didn't want them to know he understood their Hebrew. "No, my lord. We are honest men. 12 brothers, sons of one man. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father. One is no more." Joseph must have felt a sting in his heart at those words. He was standing right there. He threw them in prison for 3 days. He wanted them to feel the walls. He wanted them to hear the silence. While they were in the cell, Joseph listened through the wall. He heard them talking. "We are truly guilty concerning our brother," they said. "We saw his anguish and we didn't listen. That's why this trouble has come on us." Joseph turned away and wept. He sent them back with grain, but he kept Simeon as a hostage. "Don't come back without your youngest brother," he warned. Months passed. The grain ran out. Jacob refused to let Benjamin go. "Joseph is gone. Simeon is gone. You want to take Benjamin? Everything is against me." But eventually, hunger wins over fear. They returned to Egypt with Benjamin. When Joseph saw his full brother, the only other son of Rachel, he had to run from the room to cry. He invited them to a feast. He seated them in order of their age. They looked at each other, terrified. How does he know? Then, the final test. He sent them off, but he hid his personal silver cup in Benjamin's sack. His guards caught them. They searched the bags. When the cup was found in Benjamin's bag, the brothers didn't desert him. They didn't say, "He stole it. Kill him." They tore their clothes. They all went back. In the palace, Joseph dropped the hammer. "The one who stole the cup stays as my slave. The rest of you can go." This was the moment. This was the repeat of the Dothan scene. Would they leave the new favorite to rot in Egypt to save their own skins? Judah stepped forward. The man who sold Joseph, the man who suggested the silver. My lord, please. Our father's life is bound up in this boy's life. If he doesn't come back, the old man will die of grief. I was the one who guaranteed his safety. Take me instead. Let me be your slave. Just let the boy go home. Joseph couldn't take it anymore. He ordered every Egyptian out of the room. The guards, the priests, the servants, all gone. The room was silent. 10 terrified shepherds and 1 powerful ruler. Joseph began to sob. He cried so loud the Egyptians outside heard it. He cried with the weight of 22 years of loneliness. I am Joseph, he shouted in their own tongue. Is my father still alive? The brothers froze. They weren't happy. They were pasma, stupefied, horrified. They were looking at a ghost with the power of life and death. Come closer, Joseph said, his voice soft now. Don't be angry with yourselves. Don't be afraid. You didn't send me here. God did. He saw the whole tapestry now. The pit, the slave trade, the prison, the dreams. It wasn't a series of accidents. It was a rescue mission. God sent me before you to preserve life. There are 5 more years of famine. Go, get my father. Bring everyone. You're going to live in Goshen. You're going to survive. He fell on Benjamin's neck and wept. He kissed his brothers. The war was over. The family was whole. And the evil they intended had been swallowed up by the good God had planned. The news hit Pharaoh's palace like a thunderclap. Joseph's brothers have come. Pharaoh was delighted. He loved Joseph. He told them to take the best wagons in Egypt. Don't worry about your stuff. The best of all Egypt is yours. Back in Hebron, Jacob's heart nearly stopped. Joseph is alive, and he's the ruler of Egypt? He didn't believe it until he saw the Egyptian wagons. Then the old spirit revived. It is enough. I will go and see him before I die. The reunion in Goshen was the climax of a century of drama. Joseph got in his royal chariot and drove to meet his father. When he saw the old man, he threw his arms around him and wept for a long time. Now, let me die, Jacob said, since I have seen your face and know you are still alive. But he didn't die. Not for 17 more years. Joseph settled his family in the land of Goshen, the best pasture land in Egypt. He protected them. He fed them. He became the nourisher of the people who had tried to kill him. The famine continued, and Joseph's power grew. He bought the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. He bought the cattle. Eventually, the Egyptians sold themselves to Pharaoh just to have bread. Joseph restructured the entire economy of the nation, making the crown the owner of everything, but ensuring the people had seed to sow. When Jacob finally lay on his deathbed, he gathered the 12. He blessed them. To Joseph, he gave a double portion. To Judah, he gave the scepter. After Jacob died, the brothers got scared again. Now that Dad is gone, Joseph will finally kill us, they thought. They came to him and fell down again. We are your servants. Joseph looked at them with a heart that had been fully healed by the grace of God. Am I in the place of God? You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. He comforted them. He spoke kindly to them. The Hebrew word is al-libam. He spoke to their hearts. Joseph lived to be 110. He saw his great-great-grandchildren. He saw the family grow from a tribe of 70 into a small nation. But even at the end, Joseph knew he was a stranger in Egypt. On his deathbed, he made his brothers swear an oath. God will surely visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. When he does, carry my bones up from here. He died as he lived, a man of faith. He refused to be buried in a pyramid. He wanted to go home. He spent the next 400 years in a coffin in Egypt, a silent reminder to the Israelites that they didn't belong there. Joseph's legacy wasn't the grain. It wasn't the power. It was the demonstration that a human life, fully surrendered to God, can turn a tragedy into a triumph. He was the suffering servant before Christ. He was the exalted king before the Messiah. He was the proof that nothing is wasted in the economy of God. So, what does this ancient story of coats and pits mean for us in 2026? It's about the Joseph principle. It's the radical idea that your greatest setback is actually your greatest setup. We live in a world that feels like a famine of hope, a famine of truth, a famine of peace. We all have our pits. We've all felt the sting of betrayal, the silence of being forgotten, and the weight of unfair accusations. But Joseph's life tells us that God is a master weaver. He doesn't just fix bad things. He repurposes them. Look at the math of Joseph's life. 13 years of slavery and prison, plus 7 years of abundance, 2 years of famine, the salvation of the world. If Joseph had stayed in Hebron as the favorite son, he would have been a rich, spoiled shepherd who died when the famine hit. He had to be lost to be found. He had to be a slave to become a savior. Maybe you're in your prison year. Maybe you've been doing the right thing like Joseph with Potiphar's wife, and you still got punished for it. Maybe you feel forgotten by the people you helped. The message of Joseph is, keep organizing the prison. Don't wait for the palace to start being excellent. Joseph was a ruler in the pit before he was a ruler on the throne. Integrity isn't something you find when you're successful. It's something you forge when you're failing. And then there's the forgiveness. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. That is the most powerful sentence in the Old Testament. It releases you from the prison of bitterness. Joseph didn't have to get even because he knew God had already gotten ahead. He didn't need revenge because he had a mission. When you realize that God is using your enemies to fulfill your destiny, you stop hating your enemies. They aren't in charge. Pharaoh isn't in charge. The brothers aren't in charge. God is. Joseph's story ends with a coffin waiting to go home. It's a reminder that this world, with all its grain and gold, isn't the final destination. We are all on a journey to a better land. The dreamer's story is your story. You might be in the pit today. You might be in the prison tomorrow. But if the Lord is with you, and He is, then the throne is inevitable. Don't give up on your dreams, not because you're great, but because the one who gave them to you is faithful. The famine is real, but the provider is already in Egypt, waiting for you. Trust the process. Trust the weaver. And when the time comes to reveal who you are, make sure you can say, like Joseph, it wasn't you, it was God.